Okay, good evening, guys. Mic check. Can you all still hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Wow.
Okay, thanks a
Hi,
lot.
good evening, Chief. We can hear you.
Okay, so welcome again to Time with You. My name is Eugene, your host for this evening, and we are starting right about now. So, for those that do not know, Design with You is a weekly session that holds every Sunday by 8 o'clock. The goal is to have senior designers and experts come and talk about design topics that we believe will be helpful for each designer in Nigeria and beyond. So we have these sessions every week, and afterwards, the recording is uploaded on our YouTube channel. So tonight we are having Cynthia to come and talk to us about understanding information architecture. So before that, Cynthia is a designer with expertise with creating useful and practical solutions for people and resolving real-world user problems. So she has the opportunity to offer solutions to a variety of sectors, excuse me, including e-commerce, health, monitoring and evaluations, and many more. She's also been teaching design for a while now. She facilitates for seed builders. She's a product design mentor at ADP Lists and an instructor. So at the moment, she's a UX product designer at Natview Technology, and we have the honor of having her talk to us tonight about understanding information architecture. So Cynthia, if you can hear us, the floor is yours. Good evening.
Hello, good evening. Thank you, Jim, for having me today. It's a great pleasure. So, like he said, my name is Cynthia Caxton, and I'm currently designing for the M&E sector at Natview Technology at Abuja. So today we'll be talking about understanding information architecture, and I have prepared some slides that I'd like to share with us. So I would be sharing my slides. So Eugene, if you can give me a permission to share my screen.
Yes, you can share your slide.
Okay, although it's showing on my end that I don't have access or I've not been granted permission.
Give me a minute, please.
All right, thank you. So before I'm able to share my screen, I know that some of us, maybe not all of us, are either UX designers or product designers. And we've had maybe one or two tasks that required us to work on information architecture. I believe some of us have built sitemaps for products that we've worked on, right? So we're going to just do a little touch some areas on information architecture. We won't go in depth because information architecture is a whole story on its own. So I'll be sharing my screen now. Okay, so like I said, I'm Cynthia. This is just a brief intro of me. So let's take a look and let's do an overview of what we'll be looking at today. So we'll be doing a little intro of what information architecture is, and then we'll be looking at the principles of information architecture. Then we'll go further to check to look at the importance of information architecture, and then we will do we'll talk about how you design your information architecture, and then we'll do a little touch on career opportunities in information architecture, and then your questions come in, right? So have we ever like gone to a new city or traveled to a new town? So imagine you've gone to a new city or a new town, right? And then there are no signposts and there is no maybe map of the city. I'm very sure that you'll be confused and it will be very, very hard for you to find your way through that town, right? So it's almost the same thing with information architecture. So let's take a look at what information architecture is. So here it says information architecture is the science of organizing and structuring the content of websites, mobile, and social media software. So I know this alone might not really make sense to us, but then you have to think of some basic factors that you need to put into consideration when you're building information architecture. And the three basic factors to consider are your users, the content, and the context. Right? So we know that users are like the life of the party, right? So they are the main people that we are designing for. So be it you're designing for user-centric or you're using the human-centric design process, you're still designing for people, right? So people are your key, let's say your key audience. Those are your audience. So you need to put content that they are able to consume, that are valuable to them. So we need the second factor we need to consider is the context. So how do you want people to perceive the content that you have on your website? How do you want them to engage with them? So that is context, right? So you have a website, for instance, you have some information that you want people to see, and then those people go into the website and they are maybe browsing through. So how do you want them to move around your website? How do you want them to access information? How do you want them to perceive that information they are consuming? So that is what context is. And then the last part is the content. So the content is like the sweetener, what I say, the sweet spot of your information architecture, right? So this that has to do with the type of information that you're making accessible to your audience, right? So it could be that you're building for a fintech, you're building a fintech application, so you know that the content on that product or on that website is solely fintech related because that is the information you want people to consume when they come. So you need to valuable content, and you need to consider the context that you put that content, and you need to also put consideration on the people, that's the users who want to consume your content. So let's move further to take a look at a quote from Gerald Spohl. Gerald Spohl is a UX designer. He said, "A good design, when it's done well, becomes invisible. It's only when it's done poorly that we notice it." And with the help of information architecture, we are able to put this quote into practice, because if you're, so we all know that when you're trying to build maybe anything you're building, be it a house or a penthouse or a mansion, anything, you have to start with a foundation, right? So information architecture stands as a foundation to the product that you're trying to create. And if the foundation is poorly made, it means that the building cannot stand. So you have to put a lot of thoughts when it comes to creating information architecture. So now let's take a look at the principle of information architecture. Of course, there are some rules for us to. So number one would be the principle of objects. It says content should be treated as a living, breathing thing. It has life cycles, behaviors, and attributes. So for those who are UI designers or product designers, you know that when you're creating your products, that is your high fidelity design, sometimes you create design systems, sometimes you create maybe style guide if the product is not so big. And then you want a particular action to happen when they click on something. So it could be the hamburger menu. When you place a hamburger menu by the left hand side or by the right hand side, you want it to have a certain behavior, that's like the attributes for that element on your screen. So it goes on to be like variance and confidence, right? So let me not go into design systems anyway. So, but in your design, when you're creating information architecture, you want to make sure that for every element on your website or on your mobile application, it has a purpose. So it's not just sitting there. You want it to perform a particular action and you want it to have a particular behavior. So that is what principle of object is talking about. Let's move forward to the second principle, which is the principle of choices. So it says less is more, keep the number of choices. So the new trend in design would be the minimalistic design that we are all going for, right? So it's a very good thing to do. You don't want to overwhelm your users. Try not to also remove all the information because you want to achieve a minimalistic design, right? So when you are doing that, it leads to abstraction, and abstraction is the process of removing physical or spatial temporal details in your design. That is Hicks law, I believe. So if you're doing the principle of choices, try to keep it to a minimum, because if your users have a lot of things to choose from, then the time that they are supposed to complete an action would be longer because they don't have that luxury of saying, okay, I know what I want, because there are a lot of choices, and human beings by nature tend to dabble a lot, right? So try to keep your information to the barest minimum without so the key word now is without causing abstraction in your product or digital products, let me say. So the third one would be principle of disclosure. So it says, show a preview of information that will help users understand what kind of information is hidden if they dig deeper. So a perfect example is the FAQs and our Google search engine. So if you go to Google and then you search for a word, you see a very brief, say maybe 3 lines or 3 sentences or so of what you're looking for, right? So it does not just give you everything at once. It gives you like just a preview. Do I really want to open this link or not? And if you feel like this is what you'd like to open, then you open it because there's a preview. Another example would be when you scroll down on your Google search engine, you will see some lines, some like a sentence, and then the accordion down, like an accordion sort of. So when you click on the chevron icon, the down chevron icon, you see a play of some information, right? So the principle of disclosure is like a teaser, allow me to use the word, of what the entire content actually holds. So you are teasing it's like teasing your users to maybe click on something. So if they don't want to, then they won't, because there's a preview. They already know what they are looking for, right? So let's move to the fourth principle, which is the principles of exemplars. So it says show examples of content when describing the content of the document. So this would work very well with e-commerce applications. So I believe we have used 1 or 2 e-commerce sites, could be Jumia, Konga, etc., right, or Gigi. So see you see images. Sometimes image play a key role when it comes to examples, right? So you want to show them like an example of what you're saying. So it could be that you mean a keyboard, but then what type of keyboard are you selling? Is it the HP keyboard? Is it the Apple keyboard? So maybe an image would also be a good example. Another example would be our UX writing. So when you have a form that you're filling, so you have that UX write-up that tells the user that, okay, you are supposed to do you are supposed to impute your surname first instead of your name first, right? So that's the principle of exemplar. Moving on to the fifth principle, that's the principle of factor. So this is very interesting. This is an interesting principle. It says assume that at least 50% of users will use a different entry point than the homepage. So this is very key when it comes to designing information architecture. So just I'll still use the foundation scenario. When you're building a foundation in your house, probably you have a front door and an exit door or a back door, right? So it's the same thing. You're not assuming that everybody that comes to your website or comes into your application comes in through maybe searching your website online, right? So an example of this, let me create like a user scenario for you. So it could be that I went to Jumia, I saw a keyboard that I like, and like, oh, okay, I think Eugene is going to like this keyboard also. And then I copy the link to that keyboard and I send it to Eugene. So if Eugene is entering inside, he's entering or accessing the website, it's not going to take him to the first page of the Jumia site. It's going to take him exactly where the keyboard is, because that is what I want Eugene to see. So that is the principle of front door. You are assuming that 50% of people who are entering your site are not coming from the front door. So you have to create other entry opportunities or entry points for your users, right? So let's take a look at the sixth principle, which is the principle of multiple classification. So users offer users several different classification schemes to browse the site's content. So you have your pages, right? You have your let me take a website as an example. You have the top navigation, you have the content, right? So you need to classify your information under the same if like all the information that belongs to a particular topic should be all grouped under that topic. So if I go to a website and I go to about us, all I want to see on that page should be about that website. Every information should be there. And then if I go to contact us, I don't want to see anything about the company. I just want to see how I can contact the company, right? So you don't put everything out there for the users, because humans have a tendency of not absorbing information all at once. So you have to break that information for them. So that is where the principle of multiple classification comes in. And a good example of that is our navigations, right? So when you click on navigation, you see different modules on that navigation, and rest assured that any module you click on contains a specific information that relates to that module, right? So let's go to the seventh principle by Dan Brown. That is the principle of focused navigation. It says, keep navigation simple and that makes different items. So this is also related to the previous principle of multiple classification that I just discussed. But this one has to do with navigation itself, right? So when you have your navigation, you should know that navigation, the only rule of that element is to navigate users from one link to the other. So you could use hyperlinks or you could use modules, right? So it could be text. You can use text for navigation. That's hyperlinks. You can use images. You can also use the top navigation, bottom navigation, etc. So you know that every navigation on your system is leading to a particular page, right? So that's the principle of focused navigation. Let's take a look at the last principle by Brown, which is the principle of growth. So it says, assume that the content on the website will grow. Make sure the content is scalable. So the eighth principle is literally talking about scalability. So for designers who have been designing for maybe some companies, if you're working with a product that is constantly growing, you know that when you're designing, using most times you're using design systems, you're working with multiple designers, right? So you have to make choices that influence how users will use that application. So it could be that today you make research, then you notice that all users actually want you to add maybe a particular feature, or it could be that you notice that you would need to add a particular element to your design. And then if you make your design static, then it will be as though you're cracking the product, right? So, but if you make your design dynamic in a way where you can easily remove, add, and maybe redefine the way your users use your product, then it would be very easy. So when you're building an information architecture, don't make it closed, make it open in a sense where you feel like there's a possibility that tomorrow you might have to add something, or tomorrow the content on a particular page will grow. So you've visited, a good example would be the blog page or the website. So and every time you go to a blog page, it will be when you refresh it, there will be a new article or there will be a new blog post, right? So it means that they have made room for scalability on their website, and then users can consume that information with ease. So you don't have to build another page for a particular post that you're trying to build. So a page that you've designed 3 years ago can still serve if you put the principle of growth into consideration when building. So that is it for the 8 principles of information architecture, and these principles are by Dan Brown, like Dan, DANBROWN, Dan Brown. So now we've discussed what information architecture is and the principles that we need to consider when building information architecture, right? Now let's take a look at the importance of information architecture. So why do we actually even need information architecture? Now let's take a look at the first reason, that is AI forms the skeleton of any design project. So like I said, when you're thinking house, you're thinking foundation, right? So information architecture is your starting point when it comes to UI design, or when you're trying to do a UX design. So you have to consider information architecture. How does your user perceive, consume, and engage with your site? So you have to sketch that out. So in a nutshell, information architecture is like the blueprint of your product, right? The second importance of information architecture is information architecture informs the content strategy, user interface design, and interaction design. So just like we mentioned, information architecture plays a vital role when it comes to content strategy. So a lot of us don't work with content creators, but if you are building information architecture, you have to put this set of people into your team so that they are able to, maybe when it comes to hierarchy, when it comes to the information users consume, so how to strategize putting your content on your website. And then it also helps with how your maybe your finished product look like and how people will interact, be it by navigation or clicks, right? So let's take a look at the third importance of information architecture. It says information architecture guarantees a high quality product. So if the building has a very good foundation, that building will last very long. So same thing, if you have a very good information architecture, your product is bound to be a high quality product. When it comes to navigation, when it comes to content, when it comes to the principle of disclosure, so when you actually put a lot of thought in your information architecture, it will save a lot of money, it will save time for your team, and to also help with scalability, right? So let's look at the final importance of information architecture. It says IA design helps streamline the product design process if the design team is aware of the target user's mental models. So when you're building information architecture, right? So it has to happen as a team. So sometimes you might be a freelance designer, okay, to build information architecture on your own. But then if you work in a company or with a team, then you have to put people into consideration. So if you say you just want to do a design for maybe say an e-commerce application, and you just go from doing your research to doing high fidelity design, when you are even designing, you will figure out, oh, we didn't even include this, we didn't consider this, and then that takes you back to you maybe doing a research or creating a user flow or doing a journey map, etc. Right? But if you have your information architecture, it saves the team a whole lot of time wastage, right? So it also helps you with your user mental models. So mental models could be site maps, could be mind maps. It could just be the way user perceive the usage of product. So mental models could be how, for me, for instance, how do I use an e-commerce website? So you want to imagine how I use an e-commerce website. So target user mental models has to do with assumptions. So this assumption can range from doing a user flow, which is for task, completing a task. You want to know how users complete a specific task when using a website, right? So information architecture actually helps you figure out all these things before you move on to creating your high fidelity design, and it also save the entire team their time, right? Okay, so now let's look at the cocoa thing. That's designing and information architecture. What are the steps that you need to put into consideration when designing information architecture? What are the key processes that you need to consider? So it says UX law of cognitive bias and jumpstarts plays a vital role in creating a good information architecture. So we know that cognitive bias has to do with how users process and interpret information, right? And then Gestalt has to do with the theory that emphasizing that the whole of everything is greater than its part. So if you think of users' behavioral models and mental models, it actually helps you to create a good information architecture. So behavioral models could range from personas, creating journey maps, right? And then mental models would go for site maps, mind maps, and maybe user flow, right? So if you put all this into consideration, you are able to create a very good information architecture for your digital product. Now let's look at the key steps that are involved in information architecture. One is defining the company goals. So just like every UX designer, you want to understand what the company goals are, because you need to align that with the user goals also. So Donna Spencer, he's an information architect, explains that usually goals falls into three categories, and these three categories are making more money, reducing costs, helping people make better decisions. So the company goals has to do with making money, obviously. So the company wants to make money, right? And then you have to put this into consideration when creating your information architecture. So an example of this is the conversion rates website, and then reducing cost. You want to reduce cost. So if an information architecture is not properly done, you would have to go over and over creating maybe the process that you would have done if you had just done the information architecture, and then helping to make better decisions. Of course, that's what the 8 principles of Dan Brown is emphasizing on. So you wouldn't want to overwhelm your users with so much information that they cannot even make a choice, and then you wouldn't want to make navigation difficult and frustrating for your users, right? Then the second key factor to consider is defined user goals. So you want to conduct some kind of research. So this research could be either maybe qualitative or quantitative, creating surveys, user interviews, personas, and you can also create scenarios, right? So these scenarios should answer questions like, what are the users going to do on the website? What are their goals? So this has to do with context, like we spoke about before. So you want to know what are people actually on your site to do? What are they using your products for? And you want to know what are their goals for that project, and is there a particular need that they are trying to solve, or is there a particular need that they want to satisfy? Right? So your information architecture should be able to do all that or define that. And then the third one would be to analyze your competitors. So analyzing competitor is very key, right? So you have to think of your competitors' information architecture. But in this case, when you are analyzing competitors, it's quite different from making competitor analysis for your users, right? So it could be that you're using the SWOT analysis sometimes for your competitors' analysis or market analysis. But when you're doing analysis for information architecture, is quite different. So things you want to look out for is, where do they display information, which information is common to the data, is the website easy to navigate, what makes it good and what makes it bad, right? So you want to know some things about your competitors. So it is very healthy to have competitors in UX, right? So because you want to know how others are doing what they are doing and how they are coming about with customer loyalty and etc. So these competitors might be direct competitors or indirect competitors, but you would want to know how their information architecture works and how you can build upon what they already have, enhancing yours to make it better, to make the experience better also, right? And then the fourth key factor to consider when designing your information architecture is defining your content. So content is a critical part of information architecture because it helps with creating value to your entire product, entire digital product. So how you can define your content can be either doing a full inventory. So a full inventory could be that you have most times you might have like an existing website that you want to do a full inventory on. So what you will need to do is pull everything out, right? So you just strip your website. You can have either an Excel sheet or maybe a piece of paper or a book that you can use to take out all the information from your website. You analyze them, you see which content is critical for my website, or which one adds value to my website, which one is consumable, which one is not consumable by the users. That's what full inventory is. So partial inventory is just picking the ones you feel are important and then leaving the other ones out. So you're not doing it. So it's not time consuming as full inventory, and it's not as tedious, because for full inventory you might need an entire team. But for partial inventory, you might be able to do it yourself, and then it's not so time consuming. Then the third one is content audit. So a lot of times we do content audit in knowingly or unknowingly in our design. So this could range from heuristic evaluations, right? So content audit is shorter, like you can do it in a day. It's short, and then you can just with the like you can just pitball and say we don't want this content, and you should have your team so that you would brainstorm and deliberate on it to get final results. Right, so that is how you define your content. So the fifth one, sorry for the mistake. The fifth one here is design the information architecture of your site. So after you've done the previous four steps, now it's time for you to make the design come true, right? So the first step is to group and label the content. So when it comes to, I think some of us must have done affinity mapping in our design. So think affinity mapping, but then for information architecture. Because for information architecture, what you need to do is maybe get a piece of stick notes or post-it notes and write down maybe pages or sub pages that you feel like they are necessary for your website or your digital product, and then you can stick them up and then you group them. Anyone that you feel has related information, you group them and you label them. So this has to do with content hierarchy, right? Taxonomy and hierarchy, which we'll discuss some other time. And then step 2 is to define navigation and create sitemaps. So when you've collected your post-it notes, you've grouped them, you've labeled them, you've said, okay, this information should belong to a particular group. It's time for you to find the navigation. How are users supposed to get that information? How are they supposed to consume that information? So it could be that the navigation would be at the top, or it could be by the left-hand side or by the right-hand side of the screen. Whatever decisions you make, you should know that it's going to influence how users consume content for your website. And then you create a sitemap. So creating a sitemap might be brain-wrecking, because sometimes you might not get you might not have all the information you need. So that is why it is very good to make your research and analysis and what have you before you start creating information architecture, because you have to have all the facts in order before you're able to create a sitemap. So what a sitemap does is like a bird's eye view, right, of the entire system. So imagine you're standing on a hill and you can see every house in a particular town. So it's the same thing as creating sitemap. So a sitemap gives you a bird's eye view of the entire system, be it web or mobile application. So the third step is user testing. So user testing is vital. It could be tree testing. So tree testing is like hierarchical testing. You can get a group of people who will test information on how they are supposed to be placed. So you know that you have a parent page. So it could be that if I click on About Us, I'm going to see information about that particular subject. And then if I should click on a link on that same page, it should take us to somewhere else, maybe another page, right? Or a drill down. So that the tree testing. You want to see and if on your website. And then we have the closed card sorting. So the closed card sorting is you can also have internal, internally you have your teammates or your team members, and then you could sort out the cards. So card sorting is just stick notes with you have your writing and whatnot on it based on your information architecture, and then you're testing to see if what you already have actually works for navigation and interactivity, and if the contents are related. Then the click testing. So click testing is sometimes it's called first click testing. That's click test. For here, it's click testing. So what click testing does is it helps you see how users perceive an element on your site. So if they come to a site and they see a hamburger menu, and they click it, does it actually work by showing modules of that um, information architecture or that website? Does it show, like, what does it do? So different people have different way they perceive the website. So you want to see how they interact with your website. So that's the click testing. And we also have visibility testing, which is actually very related to most of us do usability testing when you have either an MVP or you have a prototype. So you want to see how people interact or engage with your application and how they consume the contents that are on your digital product. So the tree testing and the close testing are linked to your mental model. So you want to see how people perceive your website, right? Okay, so let's UX writing is an integral part of AI design because the specific labels help users discover information. So if you want to be a very good information architect, you also need to learn how to do UX writing, because those little things that you think are not really necessary to your users are what help them consume information or discover information on the website. So if you're thinking on developing your skills on information architecture, you should also think of maybe taking a course or two on UX writing, right? Okay, so now we've spoken about information architecture, how to do information architecture, the principles and everything, right? So fun fact is UX is a very vast field, right? And it has a lot of facets, a lot of discipline that you can decide to master it, right? So there are people who are actually called information architects, and all they do is organize and create content for digital products, right? So now, information architects spend their time structuring content so it's easy for users to find what they are looking for. The more content the product has, the more significant the information architecture in the UX and so most companies will not hire an information architect, because as a UX designer, you actually do information architecture in the design. So the only time that companies will hire information architects, it's when they have a very big team and they are working on big projects or big products. Maybe in an international company who can actually afford hiring a UX researcher, UI designer, design system specialist, etc., etc. So they can hire an information architect also. But you can also decide to master or just focus only on information architecture, where all you just do is organize and structure content of the website, and you get paid for that. But most times you have to be very, very good in it, and you have to maybe get the opportunity to work in an international company that actually afford pay an information architect, right? So let's take a look at the key roles of information architect. What are the things that they do? Are they different from UX designers, or they are just the same people? So what they do, number one, is user research. The second one is content inventory. Like I explained, that is the full inventory, partial inventory, and content audits. They do content grouping, and the third one is taxonomies and leveling. The fourth one is creating hierarchies and navigation, which we talked a little about, and then wireframing and prototype. So UX information architects are not so different from UX designers. It's just that they are specialized in that discipline of UX design, right? So this is where I'll hold my horses and then you can ask some questions so that I'll know that I have not been talking to myself all this while. Right? So, Eugene?
Okay, thanks a lot, Cynthia. That was really insightful.
Thank you.
So, what about now? We'll be taking some questions. If you have any questions, you could indicate, drop on the chat box, or kindly unmute your mic to speak. Are there any questions? So, Wisdom has a question. Please speak.
Okay, good evening. Thank you for such an insightful knowledge you've passed across. Let me put it that way. Okay, quickly, my question is this. Information architecture, first, I didn't know it's this detailed. Like, you've really broken it down for me. But then I think you need to just throw a little light on how I can differentiate information architecture and a sitemap, and probably when to use which. That it has been quite a confusion for me, so I don't know if you can help throw some light on it.
Okay. So a sitemap is an information architecture, right? So a sitemap has to do with users' mental, information architecture has to do with users' mental models. And I believe I gave some example of mental models, which is mind maps, sitemaps, and user flows, right? So those are mental models. So it depends on the product or on the digital product that you're trying to design for, but at every time you should have one or two, at least one or two of these mental models. So I can't say you have to use this at a particular time. No, that's not how it works. Everybody have their design processes, and it has to do with the product that you're designing for. So once you've done your research, you've done your affinity mapping or your empathy mapping, of course, you can go ahead to create information architecture. So your information architecture will either be a mind map, a user flow, a site map.
I hope that's clear, Wisdom.
Yes. Thank you. Okay, sorry, please. Lastly, am I supposed to do both of them on a particular project, or I'm supposed to choose which? And what makes me choose which of them to go with?
So you can do all your mental models on one project. So like I said, it highly depends on the project that you're working on. So if you're working on a project that requires like a lot of work, like you don't maybe really know your users, you want to make a lot of assumptions and then hypotheses and validating those hypotheses, right? So you want to maybe create a mind map. So a mind map will help you understand what the entire system will look like, and then how you drill down and get other solutions for your digital product. And then user flow is how they complete a particular task. And then for sitemap, you want to know every page and every sub page that would exist. So it depends on the product you're working on. So you can do all three at once, and you can also read up on how to use those three mental models that I've stated.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we have another question from Stuart. But before then, you can get access to the slides afterwards, and it will be on YouTube as well in a few days' time. So, Stuart, you could speak now. Hi, Stuart.
Good
Are you
evening,
there?
everyone. Yes, I'm here. Good evening.
Good evening.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. I have two questions. The first, when you're designing a product or a website, is it the information architects that come up with the content? And secondly, can you differentiate between user flow and task flow? Because it's a bit confusing for me. Thank you.
Okay, Stewart, I think you
Yeah.
said is the information architect the same as the content creator? Is that what you said?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, so sometimes no, sometimes yes. So if if you're good with content, you can be the content. You can do both, but most of the time you are not the content creator. So that's why I said it's very good to work in hand with your content creator. So you have a team of people. You want to know the information that are necessary on your information architecture. That's when you're building a sitemap. So it could be, like I said, UX writing is also very vital. So when it comes to navigation and labeling of your pages, you can also assist with that, right? So it all depends on your capacity, but it does not require you to know how to create content.
Okay.
Yeah, and then for the other one, you say, what is the difference between task flow and user flow? So honestly, they are the same thing, right? They are the same. User flow,
Yeah.
task flow. So for user flow, they are completing a task, and a task flow, they are also completing a task. So how does user move from point A to point B to successfully complete the task? That is what they are all the same.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much for
Thank you. Stewart.
Thanks a lot for that. Are there any other questions? Okay, I think that there's no other question. So we are right on time. So some of you came late. Sorry about that. The slides will be available. The recording as well will also be made available. Like I said earlier, the session is a weekly session. Sundays by 8 p.m. We'll be having another speaker come talk to us on that important topic. So if you are yet to follow Cynthia, the handles will be dropped on the chat box. So if you have other questions, you need clarity on any other issue, you could reach out to Cynthia. And our socials as well will also be here. So information about our speakers will be dropping in a few days' time, recording as well. And our bi-weekly newsletter will also be dropping. And we also have a partnership with Propel. Propel is a company that basically outsources design talents to companies that need them. So we basically give opportunity to our community to actually have first-hand info about that. So you can also subscribe to our newsletter to get information about that. So that'll be all for the night. Do have a lovely evening. Thanks again, Cynthia, for your time.
Thank you so much, Eugene, for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Have a good night.
Thank you too. Bye.